NDTV Profit and the markets are, well, certainly a lot weaker than what they would have been at 2 o'clock, or they were at 2 o'clock. IT index too has come off a little bit really from the highs of the day, but the main pain points, as we've stated through and through, are pharmaceuticals stocks currently. And Donald Trump has announced that tariffs on pharma imports are coming, quote unquote, very soon, which may have serious ramifications for Indian pharma companies as well, possibly. Let's get in Varsha to first tell us about Indian pharma companies or businesses that could be at risk in the wake of the potential tariffs. Varsha.
Yeah, thank you for that. So yes, again he has said the same thing, that pharma tariff will be coming soon, but from an Indian perspective, Indian generics companies perspective, Indian pharmaceutical companies have almost more than 30% of exposure to US. Let me read out a name for our US. You have Gland Pharma, which has 50% exposure from US, Aurobindo Pharma, Dr. Reddy's and Zydus Life Sciences, which has exposure from ranging from 40 to 50% to the US. When I talk about Lupin has almost 38% exposure coming from US. Glenmark has 35%. Although Torrent Pharma has a very little exposure to US, that is 9%. And all these companies, so except Torrent Pharma, if you see, all these companies have almost more than 25 to 30, more than 30% of exposure coming from the US, and that's the reason you're seeing overall the pharma indexes under pressure. Now also, couple of months back, Trump also came an order with wherein he want to reduce the prices of prescription drugs from 59 to 90%. This means that the Indian pharma companies who has specialty portfolio will get impacted. One of the companies which is growing big when it comes to specialty or branded portfolio is Sun Pharma, so Trump has given drug makers 30 days to set price targets, and he said that if the pharma companies do not reduce the prices of branded drugs, he would take possible actions on some of these pharma companies. So overall, because of the fear of tariffs coming in, which would directly impact generics companies, the pharma sector is down today.
Okay. Yeah, and certainly down in trade. In fact, we'll be getting Vishal Manchanda of Systematics, I believe, in just moments from now to talk about this. In fact, I'm told that he's with us right now. And Vishal, great having you. Thanks so much for agreeing to talk. Now, this is a reiteration of what was going to happen, right? Or what, according to Donald Trump, was going to happen. We don't know if it eventually happens or no. But the question, Vishal, is that between now and when we know the final decision, would the stocks remain under a bit of a cloud?
Sorry, I wasn't able to hear you correctly.
I'm saying,
is it the tariffs that you're speaking about?
Yeah. Donald Trump saying that the pharma tariffs are coming soon. Do you think this makes negative sentiment for the pharma sector?
Yeah, so I think sentimentally it does impact, but my belief is that the tariffs will largely impact the innovator drugs more than the generic drugs. That's what I think. Because on the generic side, if tariffs are imposed, we don't have a choice but to kind of pass the tariffs to the consumers. So either it will be the middlemen in the US who would kind of have to absorb the tariffs within their margins, or it would be the consumers who would have to pay on top of the current prices they are charging. So I think the situation for Indian companies to absorb the tariffs, we are not in that, we don't have those margins to allow us to absorb the tariffs within our cost structure.
No, but okay. So we don't quite know, Vishal, which shape or form the margins will come in, right? So until that happens, do you reckon that the pharma sector will remain under a bit of a cloud, or do you reckon that it might be an opportunity to buy some of the non-impacted companies?
So I think the stocks should remain range bound until we see an announcement on the tariffs. And then there is another overhang which pertains to the most favored nation pricing policy that Trump has proposed. So these are two overhangs where we'll see more clarity emerging over the next maybe next 1 month or next 2 months. And I think once that clarity is there, and that's where we should take a call on the stock price. But I think we can see some transient corrections even from where it is. But then if we see those corrections happening from current levels, that should from there we should pick up the stocks.
Okay, Vishal, this is Harsh joining in. So at best, we'll see this blow over. But let's talk about downside. If this were to play out and if tariffs were to be imposed on innovator companies, would that mean some part of the margins, of course, will shrink, or will they be able to hold on to margins predominantly? Where is it that you sit here?
So I think if tariffs come through and we don't have a choice but to absorb them, obviously then margins will shrink from where they are, and probably will be in a very bad shape if that happens. So it's going to be the impact is going to be very painful if we need to absorb, but I don't think that will be the case.
Vishal, Tamanna here, two parts to this. And first, let me start with what are the domestic-facing companies you think would be safer to go with right now in the space till this tariff cloud clears up? Let's start with that.
I think the audio is not very clear, but what I'm hearing is...
Let me repeat, domestic-facing companies that don't have as much exposure to the US market.
So I think right now we should only kind of... so my call is to kind of stay away from any companies that has large US domestic exposure and large exposure to kind of one or two drugs that is giving disproportionate contribution to the profits. So those are two kind of companies I'll stay away from. So anybody with 40 to 50% exposure to US sales and lot of profit concentration coming from one or two drugs. So I think the best way is to kind of be aligned with companies with large domestic exposure, 70%, 60-70% plus domestic exposure is where I would currently be in the pharma space.
Which is exactly my question. Which are your picks in that space? Pharma companies with large domestic exposure.
So among the large caps, I prefer Sun and Cipla. So they have about, so Sun would have 30. So on Sun, the thing is they have only 15% US generics exposure, and the rest 85% is coming from other areas. So basically their US generic exposure is low. So that's why I like Sun. And then the other is Cipla, which is again about 30% exposed to US generic. But they have a large exposure to domestic business, about 40% exposure to domestic business. So those are two names, and in the mid cap, I think Ajanta Pharma is one name I like. So these are three names I prefer in the space.
And Ajanta. So the second part of my question, Vishal, is that since, and you're also saying it's unlikely that, Indian pharma companies, even with exposure to the US, will have to absorb those tariffs. That's unlikely to happen. There will be some kind of going back on the tariffs, the TACO trade as it's called. In that case, if you're feeling brave, what are the stocks that you'd look at right now? Would you look at a Granules or Lupin, some of those that have taken the worst hit?
So if you ask me, I think I still see the valuations a bit stretched for some companies. Maybe we can look at Aurobindo. I think a lot of I don't have coverage on Aurobindo, just to clarify that, but I think a lot of things in Aurobindo would depend on how they ramp up the penicillin G project that they have initiated. So that's one important variable there. But since I don't have coverage, I may be missing the details here.
No issues. Thank you so much, Vishal.
Yeah.
Always a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you.
And thank you for speaking to us on such short notice, Vishal Manchanda at Systematics. And I thought that was interesting. That's something that the others have echoed as well. Go domestic. And frankly, not just in pharma. That's across the board.
Yeah.
Everyone you speak to, they're saying, look at businesses which have a more domestic-facing presence.
Yeah.